Eric Leader, if you can do me a favor and mute everybody except for you and me and our guest, Dave Sweet. I'd like to remind everybody that when we get to the Q&A, that you have to unmute yourselves because of the recent security change with Zoom, that the administrator can no longer unmute you. You can, raise your hand or do a chat, that type of thing to let us know that you have a question. I have a number of questions as always. And what we're going to do is I'm going to interview Dave for about, 15, 20 minutes here. Then we're going to open it up for questions, and I have extra questions just in case. Dave, I'm going to start off with the same question that I ask everybody when we do these. Okay, my first question always is, what are you drinking tonight and why?
Well, because you started off with the sherry barrel on the barrel and bottle, what I am starting off with is its sister, which is our double cask Town Branch barrel and bottle release. So a little bit lighter, not quite as big as the sherry, but a touch more bourbon-esque. What we did was we finished it in a fresh bourbon barrel. So that's what I'm drinking tonight.
Very nice. And so when you say we finished it, okay, when you say the we, I mean, for the most part, is that you with the distillery?
Yes. Yeah. Mark Kaufman, the master distiller for Town Branch, absolutely fantastic guy. I've had the pleasure of knowing Mark for years. To be honest, I've stalked these barrels for years, and we finally ran across each other. He said, "Hey, Dave, you know those barrels?" And I was like, "Yeah. And he says they're ready."
Got it.
This sat in a used Woodford barrel for over 10 years, over 10 and a half years. And I tasted it. It was absolutely fantastic. But I wanted a bigger, bolder whiskey for our second release of barrel and bottle. So after playing with it a little bit and again, doing some creative stuff with Kevin Foy, I called Mark up and I said, "Mark, let's put it back into a fresh Town Branch barrel."
Okay.
And he went and he did some sampling and some tasting. He goes, "Yeah." So it only was in there for 3 months in the heat of the Kentucky summer. And Mark and I worked real close. He sent me samples about every 3-4 weeks. We really pampered it.
Okay, to just wait for when it was right.
Correct.
Interesting. Because I have another bottle of Town Branch at home. I have their 7-year single malt. And so actually I did have a question for you. So what I'm drinking tonight, you saw my video, that I tasted this for the first time. And this is the Town Branch. It's a straight malt. Okay, is what it says on here.
It is a single malt. It's the same single malt that Town Branch uses. When we did the labels, and I apologize, they're used to straight bourbon.
Oh my God, seriously?
And when it went through all the label stuff, it is a straight malt, but it is actually a single malt, and the labels are glazed on, so it was too late, and we ran with it.
Oh my, that's hilarious. So this is barley as a straight malt. This is primarily barley. Okay. Is it 100% barley?
Yes, sir. Regular single malt,
Okay.
made in a traditional Irish whiskey format manner.
Okay. All right. And I see that this one was aged for 10 years and 4 months in an Oloroso sherry cask. And so I want everybody to see this here. Look at the color of this. Okay. I mean, it is a true sherry bomb. It is delicious. It came out of the cask here. It's at 60.25%, so 120.5 proof. And I got to tell you, man, I in my video, it's rich, okay, but it is incredibly rich, and it does stand up to some of the very heavily sherried scotches that I've had that are 12, 15, 18 years. And so the fact that this is $80, I don't know if it says something about, the American market or how we value things in Scotland versus here. But can you talk a little bit about just the pricing, how, things, and forgetting the tariffs. I don't want to get into the tariffs, but
right.
Even before the tariffs, Scotch was much more expensive than these things. But quality-wise, it seems to be close.
Yes, like I said, this is made in an Irish whiskey traditional manner. Tom Branch's distillery and the family that owned it or owns it are all from Irish descent. Pierce Lyons was first generation American, so that's why it has a Scotch esque
Yeah,
taste to it. Um, the pricing, the Balcones bottle that Debbie has.
actually, it's Lynn. I think Lynn
I'm
has the
sorry that
balcony,
Lynn
but
has.
Lynn,
I
yeah, Lynn
I
has the balcony.
apologize. I'm
It's
looking. All
okay.
of a sudden, there's two ladies
No
next to
worries.
each other.
No worries.
That Lynn has is at $99, which is a single barrel, and these were to be priced at that. But what we did was we saw what was happening with COVID, and we did some very COVID friendly pricing
Got it.
and worked with Binny's and their whiskey buyer. And we said, all right, we can do this. Everybody adjusted themselves a little, and
Mhm.
this is such a great whiskey. We wanted to get it out there at a fair price. So, long answer to your short
Okay.
question.
Well, no, that's great. I appreciate it. But it's interesting too, because even the Town Branch 7-year, which you were not involved with, even that one was only $35, which, it's pretty amazing when you look at some of the differences in pricing and the quality. Fascinating stuff. So, one thing I want to also ask you that's also to me very, very interesting is, can you talk about this bottle? I mean, this bottle is crazy. And I have to tell you that I do sometimes, when I go to Binny's or Warehouse or one of those other places, I like to see the color of what I'm buying, and I can't do that in this. But the bottle just jumps right out at me. Talk
Um,
about it.
Thanks. And God, I hope Brett Pontani from Binny's isn't watching this video.
Brett and I are buddies, and he might actually see this at some point. Brett and I are
Thanks a
very good
lot.
friends.
So,
You're welcome.
Brett, I've known for, and I tease. Brett's a phenomenal guy. Um, the bottle was designed to. So when I ran Whiskey Magazine for the U.S. and I was very involved with it, I did all the barrel selections for them for the U.S. All of our celebratory barrels, the icons, Four Roses, all that stuff. So it's a neat experience. Doing barrel selections is something that very few consumers have a chance to do.
Mhm.
So what we wanted to do when we developed Barrel and Bottle was, how do we bring this barrel selection to consumers? And and the bottle was to represent that. So going right from the barrel right to the bottle
Mhm.
in true barrel selection format. Everything is always unfiltered, raw, cast strength. It gets run through a very light paper filter to get the char out, and that is it. And and if you ever see our bottle, then you know that what is in there is straight raw from the barrel, the same
Mhm.
way we first tasted it.
Mhm.
Um, so we worked with it starts out like a bad joke. An American, a Brit, and an Indian all meet in a bar in Australia, and and we literally designed this. So Raj Sandoval from Amrit.
Yeah, yeah, Raj is a great guy. Yeah,
Raj was down there, myself, the president of Wade Ceramics, and Sophie, actually from a cognac producer from France, a true international effort.
Mhm.
We were all in South Australia for a conference, and we designed this and put this together literally at a bar on a cocktail napkin, which is hard to see on the sign, but we actually saved it and took a picture. And Paul sent it to his design team, and within a couple days, the folks at Wade had a first draft of the bottle, and it was real fat and skinny and looked like one of these old World War II German hand grenades. And after about 5 or 6 redesigns, this is what we came up with.
Well, it's funny. When I went to Binny's the other day to look for a bottle, because I like having a bottle of, whatever, to whomever I'm speaking with, I want to have at least one bottle of their stuff, beforehand. And I walked in there and just looked around and immediately saw it. It's very easy to find. But again, I just need to mention to you, it's like as a consumer, who doesn't, if a lot of people do like seeing the color. So has that ever come up like in your marketing studies? Because I know you're very analytical in your approach. I think you said you have an engineering background. Did that ever come up in any of your market studies about whether or not people can see the color of the whiskey, and is that an issue for them?
Actually, the retailers, the idea was that it would be, just as you said, very noticeable. And we wanted it to be very noticeable on the bar as well. And we have some relationships with some different whiskey bars around the country. We wanted it to be noticed. But yes, Brett Fontani especially had brought that up and made it very clear that, he's like, David, unless you're Highland Park, I really do not like brown liquid in a ceramic bottle. It works great for tequila. Nobody cares. It's all white anyways. In supporting us, Benny's has been fantastic. Yes, we have a glass bottle that is designed. We worked real hard on the labeling. We even have a paper that is textured for a grain, and that labeling is done. It's a standard, very typical bottle, but a label that completely wraps.
Oh, interesting.
So to create this, we will always do a ceramic bottle, but for future releases, probably only 10% of the bottlings for collectibles. And then the rest will be in glass for the exact reason. So yes, Gil, where were you a year and a half ago? I have caught some serious flack. And the problem is a lot of these retailers I have known forever, Brett being one of them. So they don't hold back.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can definitely imagine. So, I want to ask you then about when you go into a distillery, okay, what are you looking for? Is there, are you going into it looking for something new? Are you going into it looking for something special? What's the process?
To be honest, I still am very much an engineer at heart. So the very first thing I do is I go in and I look at the process. And, the first time I walked into Fuse Spirits, Paul and I are sitting there talking pipes and pressure and fluid flow. A lot of it is, I guess, is it set up for, if it's a craft production, is it set up for craft, and can they really curate and be really flexible? Which is something I really like about Few. They're absolutely hands-on. When I go into somewhere like Maker's Mark, when they first expanded, Greg Davis and I were talking about the expansion. Then a lot of it, they doubled their production and only needed 4 more people on the whole distillery.
Wow.
So I look at it from an engineering point of view, and then are they able to maintain, in my opinion, which is, I am not a master distiller, but in my opinion, doesn't look like they're going to be able to maintain consistency, which is really the very cool feat with Makers. Now with Four Roses, they've doubled their capacity, and if they can keep the quality exactly the same, then I'm going to assume that the rest of the production is going to have that kind of attention to detail. If it's all sloppy and nasty, and if that distillery is as messy, is not clean and organized, then I'm going to assume that their production isn't clean and organized.
Okay, and you mentioned,
we go into the whiskey.
Okay, so you mentioned a word that I know a lot of people have argued about what it actually means: craft. Use the word craft. Okay, and the reason why I bring this up, I host a fundraising table, a craft whiskey table every year for a homeless shelter that I've been involved with. Okay, and I work with Brett Fontani. Okay, he and I go through the shelves, we look for stuff, and we're always trying to find stuff that's craft. And every once in a while, somebody will show up at the table and say, "That's not craft." They just, they want to pick on that particular term. In your mind, what is a craft spirit?
Wow, you ask an incredibly loaded question. I guess. I guess it's a case-by-case basis. I don't have a flat rule of thumb. When the owner has a personal involvement, or when the people involved, it's a combination of the people that are involved have a certain amount of leeway, to select barrels or do production, they're involved with it, and usually a lesser or smaller volume.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the big argument is Maker's Mark craft.
Right.
The volume would make that a tough argument, I think. A. Smith Bowman, which is owned by Sazerac out of Virginia, there's 6 people entirely that are employed by the distillery, and they do
Right.
small volume. I
Right.
would call that craft. Somebody like Fuse Spirits, absolutely. Even now, they're part of a larger conglomerate with Samson and Surrey.
So now that you've answered that question, and you're
Long
talking
answer
about
to your
different,
short
well, it's okay,
question,
but there's no right answer. There's no right answer and no wrong answer. A lot of it's opinion. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to this point? You know, you started off as an engineer, but then you ended up as a whiskey publisher, and now you're doing this. Can you tell people here a little bit about the path?
Yeah, the Reader's Digest version. Yeah, I started out as an engineer, actually a materials engineer doing chemical processing. So when I walk into a distillery, it's why I Jones so much. I had an opportunity to do something else, which is actually a real estate developer in the city, which I did successfully for about 7 years, split up with my business partner, was in between things, had 3 kids to feed and take care of. And there was a family business that was in publishing that I swore up and down I would never go into because it was all travel, and what a liar I became. And it was a publisher's rep firm. And we did that. And one day I got a phone call from someone that reps some European magazine, said, since you're, and this is the funny part, we're the national rep for Wine Spectator magazine, who is now my competitor on the events,
right,
with Whiskey Advocate. And they said, would you be interested in carrying a beer magazine and a whiskey magazine out of England? I said, sure. And we did that for about 1.5 years. And I got a phone call. You're going to be in New York in April? No, but I can be. What's up? And he goes, well, one of your clients is hosting a whiskey tasting event at Tavern on the Green in New York.
Nice.
Tavern on the Green in New York in April. I can do this.
You can do that, sure.
And that was the first Whiskey Live event. And I was looking at getting into events. Our company was doing about 160 of them a year in all different industries. And got more involved with, somebody's drinking something good. And got involved with the magazine. And then a few years later, took over the events on an ownership level and more involved with the magazine, and eventually became the senior VP of Whiskey Magazine for North America, and worked very closely with the UK office, and helped run the magazine on a not just US but national
right, and then
level.
you have the Whiskey Live events. You know,
yeah, we expanded Whiskey Live events, did them all across the US and Toronto. So I launched all of them except for New York. And
so Whiskey Live, so you're no longer affiliated with Whiskey Live, correct? Now it's other people running it. Am I correct about that? Okay. But you have a whiskey, what's it, a Whiskey and Barrel Night? Is that what
Correct. So we own the event. So Whiskey Live is franchised around the world. And so we had already owned the event. So we just shut down our involvement with Whiskey Live and relaunched as Whiskey and Barrel Night, which would allow us to be a lot more inclusive.
Okay, so Whiskey and Barrel Night is owned completely by you. Okay, so how do you decide what distilleries are going to be involved in Whiskey and Barrel Night?
In all honesty, we invite everybody.
Okay.
So a lot of it will depend on which market is important for them, what they have going on, everything.
Okay, that answers that. That's a great question. That's a great answer to the question. Straightforward. So I actually have several other questions, but I want to give other people opportunities here to ask questions. So remember, people, you need to unmute yourselves to ask a question. So Eric, if you can help at all with this process, but we don't have that many people on the call right now, which means that I think that people can just jump on and start asking questions. And I think that I saw Michael Bloom, I thought that you had a question. I thought that you raised your hand to me or something like that. No? Okay. Lynn?
It's just
Yeah, I'm curious as to how you decide which barrels to look at, how you pick them. And it seems to me you've got quite a broad range, but very, very specific. What goes into that?
Well, first you have to have a distillery that is willing to work with you and put their whiskey in your bottle. So they have to have a lot of faith and trust and confidence that you're going to represent their whiskey properly. And then as far as barrel selections, it is entirely off of my palate. And then Mario Campa will work with us as well. A lot of Mario's experience is in Scotch. So I take the lead on the American whiskeys with barrel and bottle. But I look for something that's different, something that's unique, but is that brand, but is different. So when we were doing barrel selections with Breckenridge, I have a god-awful sweet tooth. So I'll look for something that will suit my sweet tooth, something that I think consumers are going to be able to, are going to like, but I want something that's big and bold and rich. If it's a single barrel, it should speak of that brand, but be different, and should be something very, very special.
I guess what really puzzles me is I'm very surprised by this Balcones, which is young, very hot, unless you add some water, and it opens up magnificently. But I'm stunned that you picked something that young.
Well, all the Balcones are that young. You got to remember they're in Waco, Texas.
Right. So it's hot.
And
Well, the evaporation.
So they're
right,
aging all year round. They don't have a cold season.
Right.
And
So they're probably like Amrut, right? Are they
Yeah, but
standardly like Amrut?
barrel
losing a bunch
strength
every year.
on this is really high. It's over 60. It's like close to 64%.
Correct. Yeah.
It's high.
And it's, it goes in a little warm. Chip Tate always liked hot whiskeys, and it's aging all year round. So in a hot, dry climate, the alcohol level is going to increase. Like in Scotland, the alcohol level actually decreases over time because of the different weather. So, but all of their Balcones is that young. They're all in that 3-year range unless they do something special. Otherwise, there's a risk that it'll become overwooded.
Thank you.
Yeah, good answer. Very good answer. Other questions that people have?
Dave, you mentioned at the top of the call that you were looking at one of the barrels, and I think you said like it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and then it was aging before you put into another a bit more of the finishing barrel. How early do you start doing barrel selects?
Great question.
And holding on to that before you do a finished product.
These barrels I knew were coming just from talking to Mark Kaufman, the master distiller. So like I said, I've been stocking these barrels. Him and I had talked about it. I was very familiar with the Town Branch single malt, probably one of the most underrated whiskeys on the shelf. And so once I sampled and tasted it, to be honest, I thought it was very light. It was exquisite. But like I said, I wanted something big and bold and deep and rich. And it goes all the way back from the very first barrel selections I did with Jim Rutledge. And so that's what gave me the idea of finishing it in a fresh Town Branch bourbon barrel. And when I say fresh, I mean, they dumped it at 8:30 and we refilled it at 10 in the morning. So
Wow.
It was wet.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So what other questions do people have? As I mentioned, I have several other questions here that I can ask.
Dave, I'd like to swing the conversation into whiskey festivals, and considering Gil's Tasting Whiskey with Gil series really started out of the fact that the pandemic hit right around the whiskey week. Do you think it'll ever come back? And how do you think it's going to be affected?
God, I hope so. I'm going to be going to have a challenge if it doesn't. Yeah, I do think it is going to come back. One, American consumers, they're an odd bunch. They have a long memory, but they have a short memory also, and they want to get back to regular life. Proof of that is Governor Cuomo being upset in New York because people are there and 100, 200 people in the street. The industry needs it to come back. There's an old expression called liquid the lips, which is how you introduce people to whiskey, how you sell whiskey. Wow, I mean, Gil and I bounce around on Facebook on this topic as well. Yes, I think they're going to come back. I think that there's a mix of consumers. The industry wants them to come back when it is safe. The industry is being incredibly conscious of the people that work for them and their customers. It's really impressive. Another example of how family-oriented the bourbon industry is. There's the way I figure it right now, there's a third of the consumers that are ready to go to a tasting tomorrow. There is a third of the consumers that may never come back to a large scale tasting event. And then there's that third that's in the middle, and they will all find their comfort level. Our New Jersey event.
Yeah, I mean, I could see consumers that are 30 and below going back tomorrow. But old fucks like me, I don't want to take that risk. There's just no way I'm going to do that right now. As much as I enjoy and I love the companionship of friends and meeting people I've known in the business for years. But a lot of those guys I know, I don't think are willing to go back either. So it's just a question of, is there a way of putting a festival together that doesn't have a room with 600 people in it?
I would go back tomorrow, and I'm a lot older than most of you folks.
I think you're the exception to the rule, Lynn. But let's go back to Dave's answer. Dave, you were going to respond to Mike?
Mike, you're absolutely correct. And we will lose some diehard long-term customers. There will be nothing that I will be able to do to make them comfortable. I understand. I respect that. We're doing some virtual tastings. Gil, we're going to have you on. We will try. We will do everything we can. I started to say our New Jersey venue is afforded us the room right next to the main hall for us to spread out. We're working with them to do an outside event. So, all these different things to help promote it. Outside events are tricky. We partner with the Scottish Festival and Highland Games and do them at a handful of places. New Jersey is Pleasanton's inside of a separate building, so it's basically the same. We did it in Chicago with the Scottish Festival and Highland Games. You're susceptible to weather. Out in the grass is never a good thing. I mean, it's logistically, it is incredibly hard. And
actually, let me, if I can jump in here. I also, we mentioned Brett Pontani, so I speak with him periodically. And, he's hoping that they can do something maybe by the end of the year. Okay, since World of Whiskeys was canceled. But the problem, it's funny, there was also a logistical issue that Brett brought up, which is fascinating. He said that when we can finally do things again, there is going to be such a big rush. And the amount of work that's involved in getting all the distillers out, and with all, they plan for World of Whiskeys for months in advance to have the inventory there, to have the people there, and no matter when we get opened up again, it's going to be bumpy, okay, just because of the logistics involved. And you, as somebody who's run these events, actually, that I'm glad that Michael asked this question. What's sort of the lead time to put on a successful whiskey tasting like you do with a number of distilleries?
To be honest, we select the dates. We try to do the dates 9 months to a year in advance.
Okay, that
All
answers the
right,
question.
and you are absolutely correct. Some will inevitably miss something and come in last minute, but most of them plan their marketing schedule full, for the year. So they're planning right now for 2021, and then they will complete that. 80% of them will complete that planning in December for the whole rest of the year. So, yes, that is the problem. It is going to be hard to do anything. We understand this. We are going to work with our brands. We understand we may have to staff some of their tables. They may send in some whiskey, and we're preparing that. We're putting a team of staff and bartenders and experienced people together. It's not ideal.
I can tell you right now,
problem.
Yeah, I can
this
tell you
year's
right now,
events are going to be make them as best as you can.
Got it.
And kind of run with what you got.
Well, I will tell you that there are a number of people on this call who would love to help with staffing any whiskey event that exists. And I actually have an Illinois Bassett license. I have a license to pour. So, and I actually ski live last year. I was a staff in their exclusive tasting room. So believe me, if you need people, I can help you get people. And hey, people, raise your hand who would want to be involved in something like that.
Happy to get a license.
I'm sure you would.
I definitely would take you up on it. I think there's going to be a need for that, but a lot of it is the promoter. So if the promoter is not used to doing that and working with the brands, and if the brands don't have the confidence for that promoter to help steer or properly manage that staff, and if they don't have any experience, then they're just going to back out of it. And that is going to be a question. And a lot of them, if their staff is a little bit older, or if somebody has a pre-existing condition or
that
something,
obviously that changes things.
A little bit more exposure, we know that we're going to have some brands that aren't going to be able to participate, and we're going to try to make up for that and cover them and get their whiskeys on the table as best we can.
Got it. So I'm actually going to ask you a question now. We've been talking about the smaller distilleries, Town Branch, Balcones, other places that you've worked with. Have you ever worked with, or would you ever work with somebody as big as, say, MGP? Because, MGP, they produce for everybody. Everybody sources from MGP. And some of their stuff is really good. And I know that they have some really good casks in there. Would you ever work with an MGP, or do you really try to stick with the small ones like the Fuse, the Balcones, the Town Branches?
In a heartbeat. MGP makes some phenomenal whiskey. There's a lot of people that put their nose up at it. I think that's just, I don't think it's right. I won't be any more descriptive than that. And I would work with them in a New York minute. We are speaking with a couple other large distilleries right now. I've done celebratory barrel picks with Woodford, a full range of roses twice, with Heaven Hill and a bunch of others, probably about 50 different barrels scattered all over the brands. And they all have fantastic whiskey, and I would love to be able to put a barrel of it in our bottle long. Again, yes, I would. It's just a matter of the larger the company, the harder they are to deal with a joint venture like this because of the labeling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and actually the labeling is important. It's, and also the concept of shelf space too. Because whatever it is that you're bottling, there's a shelf space for it. So you have to make sure that your retailers are also going to be happy with it as well. I would presume that that's part of the discussion.
And part of that discussion is we do that for them, because we have relationships not just with Binny's, but several others here in Chicago, New Jersey, New York. Every market that we're in, we have developed relationships with the major whiskey retailers in those markets, which is not easy. They're very busy right now. Well, until now, they were all fairly successful. I was more of a nuisance. So there was a lot of give back. And these are relationships, some of them that have been developed over the last decade and a half.
What's your
result? They know they've supported us on our barrel picks,
okay.
And they know me, they know my palate, they know the types of barrels that we choose, and we have a history of. So when we talk to Pat at Bayway Liquors, here, Pat, what do you think? Fine, Dave. The answer is yes. Send me some samples so I can cross the T's and dot the I's, but yes.
That's nice.
But you're right. Shelf space is an ongoing issue.
Yeah, I can imagine. As far as business is concerned, has business been good during COVID? Because, the way a lot of people describe Binny's during this time, thank God it was considered to be an essential business. Going to Binny's is almost like going to Disney World nowadays. Has business been good? How are sales for your company at this time?
We're working. New York and New Jersey had a much smaller volume of products, so those have sold through fairly quickly. I don't think that there's anything but a handful of bottles left. Binny's took the lion's share for Chicago. Gene was on track to take some at Warehouse. Obviously, he's had to pull back, and a couple others. So, it's hard because when Lynn came and bought the Balcony, she was able to taste.
Right. So
now somebody sees this, they can't see that incredibly dark color on the whiskey.
Right.
So this really does work to our disadvantage on the sherry cask. And I can't be there to introduce people to it, which is why the tastings really kind of need to come back, because taste is what sells whiskey more than anything else. You know?
Well, I totally agree with you on that. We are so fortunate, those of us who are in Chicago are so fortunate that we have places like Warehouse, places like Binny's that host amazing tastings all the time. As a matter of fact, you mentioned before, that you're an empty nester. Well, so am I. And I really, literally the week that my daughter got on the plane to go to Israel, I tickler in my calendar. Every Monday, okay, this is starting last August, okay, every Monday, I would check the calendars for Binny's and Warehouse and Delilah's, Duke of Perth and Fountainhead, okay? And every Monday I would check the calendars and I would see, is there anything that week that interests me? And I was just going all the time. And so, of course, now to have this just, taken away so abruptly, and you're right, the education involved in seeing somebody like you at the store, really showing us your wares. It's got to have an effect at some point,
It does. We're lucky in that we've got a strong reach and we've got a customer base we can reach back to, and relatively active without overdoing it on social media. And we don't have a large volume to sell, but there are a lot of brands on the higher end marks that are feeling it very, very much so.
Does anybody, we're right at our time limit here. Does anybody else have any other questions before we sum this up?
I don't have a question, but I really want to echo what Dave said. When we tasted 3 different whiskeys. I think there were more available, but there were 3 that were of particular interest. And without tasting them, there was no way I could possibly have known. One of them was a definite no, one of them not really, and one was just so glorious. We had a second sip to confirm it. But there was nothing in the color, even in the samples, nothing that would have told us which one. And had I looked at the label, I'd have said, I don't want anything that young. But it turned out to be something that with some water opened up to something glorious. But how would I have known without tasting it?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, Lynn. Great point.
Paul,
exactly.
you had a question?
Yes, sir.
Paul?
Paul, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I was going to let that finish, but then I had to find my mute button to undo it. So kind of on we talked quite a bit about working with larger institutions and everything like that for the independent bottling. But and I asked this question to a few independent bottlers and everything. But what do you find kind of like your role in terms of bringing smaller regional craft distilleries to a broader audience? And I ask that because a lot of my favorite casks of some of the more, local players, like Koval, for instance, Josh at SCN for the Whiskey Jubilee had one of the best Koval bottlings I've ever seen. And it was like completely different. And there's a lot of interesting, unique, smaller distilleries, craft distilleries, if you will, kind of out there that we don't really get a.
I think he hit the mute button.
No. I wonder if he was outside and he lost internet.
Ah, damn.
He hit the hang up button.
Actually,
Yeah.
he hung up. He's gone.
Yeah, he's gone.
Oh, dude. Oh, that's a shame. All right. Well, you know what? Out of respect for your time and everybody else's time. Wait, did he just come back on?
No,
No? Okay.
somebody else
Out of
dropped.
respect of your time and everybody else's time here, I'd like everybody to fill up their glasses, and or not fill up, obviously, but give yourself a little bit more of a pour. If everybody could hit that unmute button, I'd appreciate that. Remember, you all have to unmute yourselves. Okay.
I think
Everybody,
we lost
let's
Dave.
unmute. What's that?
I think
think
we
we
lost
lost Dave.
Dave.
Oh, jeez.
What the hell?
We lost Dave.
Drink quickly before we all lose each other.
What the hell's going on
Toast him
today?
anyway.
Let's toast to our guest, Dave Sweet. Dave,
To Dave.
Dave, we're going to make sure that you see this video. Thank you very much, everybody. One
Thank
of
you,
those nights
Dave.
of
Thank you.
technical
Bye.
Thank you, Dave.
difficulties.
Thank you,
Thank
Gil.
you.
Thank you,
Gil.
everybody. Great questions,
Cheers.
people. Y'all are
Cheers.
awesome.
Oh, there's Paul.
That's
Thank
probably either Dave or Paul.
That was Paul.
Wait. Paul's back, but we don't have Dave. What
We
the
still
hell's
don't have
going on
Dave.
here? This is ridiculous. Oh, God, this is crazy.
Hello?
Paul, not only did we lose you, we also lost Dave.
At the same time,
We lost
Like
Dave about
30
half a
seconds
minute
later.
after you.
I don't know what I did, but
So we
I guess-
can't even get his answer to your question because he's not here anymore.
Right, we lost
So-
Mike. We lost Michael Bloom first.
What's that?
We lost Michael Bloom first. Then we lost Paul. Then we lost Dave. There's Dave.
back.
Dave!
Hey!
Dave, unmute yourself. Dave, unmute. Okay, Dave. All right, everybody, once again, thanks, Dave, for being here
Thanks,
tonight. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you.
Thank you, Dave.
Your help.
And thanks to the wonderful answer to my question.
Right, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Dave, we can't hear you.
There we go. How's that?
There
Much
we go.
better. So, Dave, we had some major technical difficulties. We seem to have lost like 3 or 4 people right there as we were summing up. And I just want to let you know that everybody has toasted you and said thank you for
Thank you very
generous
much.
time.
And thank you for agreeing to send everybody a bottle.
Yeah.
Was there one last question?
You know what? Paul, can you give a really, really quick summary of your question, like Reader's Digest?
Sure. So, small independent craft distilleries, what do you find your role in terms of bringing them to a broader audience? And I asked that in reference to the fact that my favorite bottle of Koval was an individual release that Josh did for Whiskey Jubilee.
I love working with the craft brands, and like I said, I've had an opportunity to taste a lot of them with some really, really cool barrels. Part of it is it has to be marketable. For me to do something local, our ongoing examples. So Few Spirits, if they weren't national, it'd be great to do them in Chicago. But if I can't take it to New York or California, if they weren't known, which they are now, of course, it's a very hard sell. So then I've got to go into a retailer and say, here's this brand that nobody's ever heard of at a higher price point than normal. So, if we have a demand for it in their existing market, or if they want to work with us to go into a new market, I will do that, and I'll carry that weight. But it's very hard to get a a brand that maybe is a small craft brand out of Kentucky and take it to New York and nobody knows what it is.
It's hard to become their ambassador.
I'd have to have somebody in that market that was in the store almost parked permanently doing tastings.
Okay. Perfect. Wonderful. Glad you were able to come back and join us so that we can all say thank you. Eric Leader, thank you again, once again, for hosting all of this. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Our next one, actually, it's funny you mentioned Brett Pantani, because our next one's with Brett. Yeah, I think that's August 4th. Our next one's with Brett Pantani, August 4th. Knowing Brett, I will not get a word in. He'll just keep talking over me, knowing Brett. But that's okay. You know,
Gil, that's another one you're not going to do in 45 minutes, man. That's
it's funny. We're going to plan for an hour for that one, probably like we planned for an hour with Joshua and Jason from Single Cast Nation. But
if you want to get a laugh out of Brett, just tell him that you were talking to me about the bottle and mentioned his name, and I cringed.
Somebody here remember that for me, just in case I don't, okay? And Dave, again, I just want to tell you, I'm really enjoying this bottle, this Sherry Bomb. I think it's great. And the price point's ridiculously good for something aged that long in an Oloroso Sherry cask that's single malt. It's freaking delicious. And I haven't added any water to it tonight, and this is my third dram. Really good stuff. And again, thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
And
cheers.
I can confirm August 4th is the next one because that's my birthday. So
Yay.
I'll see you all for my birthday.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Cheers.
You too. Bye.